Situated to the west of the South China Sea and to the east of Cambodia and Thailand, Vietnam is one of the fastest developing Southeast Asian nations. It has a financial technology market that is anticipated to approach $8 billion by 2020 and a staggering GDP growth rate of 6.8% for 2017. It is a dynamic and diverse region. Modern cities such as Ho Chi Minh and Hanoi show dramatic contrasts with the slower, easy pace of traditional agricultural life on the Mekong Delta. However, this stable growth belies a darker past. Though the previous 4 decades have tempered governmental policy, modern Vietnam began as a communist regime following the infamous Vietnam War. It can be argued that this is the most influential event in the country's history, a gruesome war of attrition that has given rise to numerous ethical issues. Fought from November 1955 until April 1975, the conflict between North Vietnam and South Vietnam was more than a civil war. Indeed, it is considered by some to be more of a proxy war, with the Viet Cong of the North being supported by the Soviet Union and other communist allies, whilst the southern government was supported by the United States. The initial justification for the deployment of US military in Vietnam was to prevent the spread of communism at all costs, applying the same containment theory that had previously worked with some degree of success in Korea. What the US failed to anticipate was the debilitating effects the jungle conditions and the tactics of the Viet Cong would have on military operations. The Chu Chi tunnels near Ho Chi Minh City, known then as Saigon, provide an example of the guerrilla warfare employed by the Viet Cong, along with a more general insight into their wartime way of life. These tunnels were separated into 3 distinct levels, ranging from just below the surface to several meters deep. A complex system of air holes, seals, and trapdoors allowed the inhabitants to remain in the tunnels for extended periods of time. Usually, this would just be during the day, but during periods of heavy bombardment, the fighters could stay in the tunnels for multiple days at a time. This was not without cost, though, as reports from the Viet Cong estimate that up to half of any given unit had malaria, and the tunnels were infested with all manner of venomous and poisonous insects. Hospitals in the tunnels were crude and had access to few medical supplies. At night, those living in the tunnels would come out to fight, tend to crops, or perform other activities. These included hampering the progress of the American troops by laying traps, which were mostly constructed around sharpened bamboo spikes, although landmines and repurposed unexploded munitions were also widely used. Similar inventions were also used within the tunnels to discourage enemy troops from venturing down. Nevertheless, it became army protocol to flush out the Viet Cong by sending soldiers down into the tunnels. Referred to as tunnel rats, these soldiers took immense risks with only basic training. This was typical of the war, where the psychological damage inflicted upon the drafted American troops drove many to commit desperately barbaric acts in a retributive quest to eliminate the enemy. The War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh records the nature of some of these atrocities, including the use of carpet bombing, nail bombs, napalm, and chemical warfare. Agent Orange is perhaps the most famous of these, a dioxin-based defoliant designed to tactically clear the dense jungle landscape. Dioxins are a group of environmental pollutants, but also have incredibly harmful effects on humans. Notably, they can cause severe reproductive and developmental problems, the result of which has been generations of disfigurement and pain for the Vietnamese people. The use of napalm is also well known, with the particularly famous photo of Napalm Girl also on display in the museum. All of these various war crimes were not, however, enough to subdue the northern forces. Eventually, the US withdrew its support for the South government and Saigon fell on the 30th of April 1975. Dramatically, this culminated in a North Vietnamese tank smashing through the gates of the Independence Palace, which was then the workplace and residence of the President of South Vietnam. Immediately after the war, Vietnam became a communist country, but has since shifted to become a more moderate socialist republic. A notable shift in policy occurred with several economic reforms in 1986, allowing businesses to operate in the country. This was the end of Vietnam's political and economic isolation, and the country has since integrated successfully into the global economy. Today, Vietnam is a thriving center of growth in Southeast Asia, in stark contrast to its neighbor Cambodia. Cities such as Ho Chi Minh and the capital Hanoi bear strong resemblance to their western counterparts and are thriving urban centers. Despite this, once outside of the cities, it is easy to see that Vietnam is not so different from the rest of Southeast Asia. More than a third of the population still work in agriculture, with one of the largest areas of farmland being the Mekong Delta at the southern end of the country. Here, everything the land has to offer is used, with many crops forming several distinct products. Given that the Mekong Delta is colloquially referred to as the Rice Bowl of Vietnam, it is unsurprising that rice products are ubiquitous. Pop rice, rice paper, and sweet treats are just some of the seemingly endless number of uses for this staple crop. Even the husks are used to fuel the fires under the stoves. Nothing is wasted. Similarly, coconuts also produce a range of different foods, including coconut candies. Here it is easy to see the connection between Vietnam and its Southeast Asian neighbors, Cambodia and Thailand, where the production of various foods, sugars, and cooking utensils from coconut and palm is still vital in many regions. Though it is labor-intensive, work in the Mekong Delta generally reflects a slower and more relaxed way of living. There are not so many of the pressures present in large cities, but equally there are less opportunities. In fact, many young adults from the region leave to pursue work in urban areas, hoping to use some of that income to help support their family back home.